Welcome to the Passive Income Machine podcast, where we show you how to break free from the grind and achieve real financial freedom in 10 years or less. My name is Ryan D. Lee, and I've helped thousands turn income into cash flow, trade fake money for real assets, and take back control over their time, their wealth, and ultimately their life. Each week, you'll get strategy, tools, and mindset to build your own passive income machine. So my friends, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's episode. All right, my friends. Welcome back to the Passive Income Machine podcast. You are on the microphone today with me, Ryan D. Lee. And today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics of conversation, setting impossible goals, and why you should consider inside of your life, inside of your financial plan, especially setting an impossible goal. Let me give you an example to kind of start this off. I want you to imagine that I pulled out a checkbook and I said, I'm going to give you $10,000 to walk across a wooden beam 30 feet across, and that beam is laid out, right over the ground. You look at that and you're like, I can do that easy, right? I can walk over that beam, get that $10,000, no failing. It's just easy, okay? Now let's raise the stakes a little bit. Let's say the day you come to do this, I raise that beam up and it's 30 stories above ground. Now you have to walk across the same beam, but now you have the fear of if you fall off on either side, you're going to fall 30 stories to the ground. Now, you might be considering at this point that might not be worth $10,000, but let's raise the stakes or change it just one more time. Let's say that I take the money away, but now this beam is stretched out across a building from one side to the other, and on the other side of that beam is your child, right, in a burning building. Would you hesitate at this moment to jump on that beam and get across? Absolutely not. It wouldn't matter what obstacles were in your way. You would jump on that beam and you would run. Now, why? What changed in this scenario? Well, the goal didn't change, getting from one side to the other. The motivation, went from doing it on the ground to getting $10,000. But what ultimately changed in this scenario is you did. The impossible goal did. You had now the opportunity to go and save your child. They don't require, like an impossible goal, it doesn't require you to have better circumstances. They require you to have a bigger, better version of you. Now listen, I love impossible goals because an impossible goal is really only impossible to the person that you are today. To achieve an impossible goal, you have to let go of who you are to become the person of whom that goal is now inevitable, to become the person that's capable of doing what you previously perceived the impossible to be. And that's exactly what I want to talk to you about today. How setting impossible goals unlocks growth, it unlocks urgency, and it unlocks transformation, especially when it comes to something like becoming financially free in 10 years or less. Now, the reality of this is an impossible goal is something that allows you to start getting rid of distractions. In Ben Hardy's book, 10x is easier than 2x, he talks about this idea of a 2x, like a slight improvement goal. I want to get, 1% better this year, or I want to, increase my savings rate from 6% to 7%, or whatever that might be. Goals that are easily achieved, there are 1,000 ways to achieve them. And for most people, they get stuck, right? They get stuck because they're not challenging themselves. There's too many options to accomplish the same goal. But when you set a 10x goal, when you raise the stakes, when you raise the bar and say, look, I want to become financially free in 10 years or less, no matter where I'm starting from, all of the potential options start to dissolve in front of you because most options aren't strong enough, aren't good enough to achieve such a massive goal. And what emerges are the few paths, the direct paths to achieving a goal like that. Ben Hardy in his book, he talked about his son being a tennis player. And, in high school, there were thousands of tennis coaches. In fact, Ben Hardy lives in Florida. I guess it's the mecca of tennis training. But, his son had lots of opportunities, lots of potential coaches as a high school, college, or a high school tennis player wanting to get better. But one day, Ben Hardy and his son sat down and they said, what would it take to go pro? When they asked that massive question, when they went from I just want to be a better tennis player to I want to go pro, a 10x goal, they started looking online and finding coaches that could train and connect someone with the opportunity to go pro. What ultimately emerged were there were only 2 coaches in the entire area that even had the potential and possibility of helping Ben Hardy's son go pro in tennis. That's the power of a 10x goal. Now, 10x goals can also have a challenge to them because inside of the brain that we all operate with, there's really two thinking patterns that we're operating with on a daily basis, two brains that we're working with continually. There's the primitive brain. The primitive brain is wired to keep you safe. It avoids pain. It avoids risk. It avoids change. It's the part of your brain that says, look, let's just keep things, status quo. Let's keep doing things the way that we've always done. And the primitive brain is an extremely important brain, part of our brain that we have, but it hasn't really evolved. Think back to our cavemen and cave women parents way back in the day, living in a cave, right? The primitive brain was meant to keep them alive, right? If a saber-toothed tiger showed up, they needed to have the fight or flight response system kicking in to use that fear to drive them to survive. But today our primitive brain isn't facing saber-toothed tigers. We're not facing life or death situations. We're facing really convenience. That's really the hard part. And our primitive brain loves convenience. So it wants to keep everything safe. Our prefrontal cortex, the part of our brain that is creative, our future thinking brain, this is the part of our brain that plans, that solves problems, that builds businesses, that has dreams of freedom, of accomplishment, of becoming, and imagines a better life. And these two brains are constantly at odds with each other. The prefrontal cortex wants to rush into the unknown. The prefrontal cortex wants to do things that do require risk. The prefrontal cortex wants to elevate the quality of their life by challenging the status quo. But the primitive brain, that's trying to keep the prefrontal cortex, in a corner, to shut up, because every time the primitive brain is challenged, it wants to do everything it can to keep us safe. Now, here's the problem. Most people, they try to use their primitive brain. This is the brain that usually kicks in naturally for people, but they try to use that part of their brain to solve impossible problems. And that brain just isn't built for solving prefrontal cortex problems, for elevating the quality and the status of our lives, for setting impossible goals. It only knows how to survive, not thrive. So when you say, I want to be financially free in 10 years, your primitive brain immediately kicks in and calls BS. It says, that's not even possible. That's not safe. That's not normal. Let's go back to how everyone else is doing it and how we've always done it. But your higher brain, the prefrontal cortex, this is the part of you that knows that it's not only possible, but you have to create that urgency to go along with it. Going back to the example that we started our podcast with, urgency is what allows us to face the impossibility and find a way through it. Achieving financial freedom, it's absolutely possible. There are plenty of success stories of people out there who have done it. And if you say you want to do it as well, but it's not a commitment that you have with a sense of urgency behind it, you will fail and you will quit. When the going gets hard, when things get challenging, you will let your prefrontal, or you will subdue your prefrontal cortex, let your primitive brain step back in and go back to what is safe and secure. Because I'll be honest with you, you get to choose your hard. Achieving financial freedom in 10 years or less, it is hard. It's not an easy thing to do. Otherwise, everyone would do it, right? But because it's hard is the exact reason why you need to access the different part of your brain. You need to access the prefrontal cortex, and you need to have a driving sense of why you want to do it and why it's urgent enough that you're going to do something about it right now. Because it's so easy, my friends, to get complacent, to get stuck, to say it's good enough. And that is just choosing a different kind of hard. If you choose that kind of hard, waiting for one day, it's good enough, being stuck and complacent with average, then your hard that you're choosing by default is you will never be wealthy, you will never be free, and you will be a victim of the financial system. So choose your hard. The reason you should set an impossible goal is because it starts training you to tap into the part of your brain that you have access to right now that will drive you to create something better for your life right now. Hey, real quick, before we get back into it, I gotta tell you, if you're getting value here, you'll love the How to Retire in 10 Years Summit. I mean, seriously, everything you're hearing right now, the tactics, strategies, all the insights, they all tie back to this one incredible event. We're laying out the exact blueprint for financial freedom in 2025, and pre-registration is open right now. If you jump in early, you'll get special bonuses that won't last forever. So hit that link in the description or go to retireintenyears.com and secure your spot. Now, let's get back to the show. It's the part of your brain that you are destined to be if you give yourself permission without constraints of achieving your highest potential. Ed Milet, he talks a lot about meeting the future version of himself. And I love the way he talks about it, because he talks about meeting that person that he could ultimately become. And his greatest fear in life is meeting that person and realizing he sold himself short. He let fear, he let complacency, he let the world, he let whatever it was get in his way to achieving and growing into his greatest potential. I don't want that to be me either. We get one shot at this thing called life. And if I meet the person that I could have been, the person that I'm destined to become, if I just start leaning into and living from my prefrontal cortex versus my primitive brain, man, what's possible in my life? Let me give you a little example here, okay? Let me take you back a few years for me, right out of college. I was on the pursuit of becoming financially free. In fact, for me, I called it retiring early. I wanted to retire early. That was my goal. That was my objective. And I worked hard. I saved hard. I put all of my money in 401ks, IRAs, brokerage accounts. I did all the things that everyone told me to do. But for me, I'll never forget in 2008, I lost almost 80% of what I had saved. And for the first time, I started looking at what I had done and realized I had no control. I kind of brushed it off and just said, look, I've got plenty of time. I want to retire I want to retire early, and I'm now just in my 30s. So I can just start all over and I can wait a little bit longer, try something new, and hopefully it kind of works out. There was really no urgency other than just a desire to retire somewhat early. But then something changed for me. A few months later, after losing a bunch of money, my oldest son had heart surgery. And that heart surgery really opened up a lot of different avenues for me to consider and really do an inventory on my life and the decisions that I had made. You see, previous to my son's heart surgery, I had been trading a lot of my time, a lot of my attention, a lot of my awareness to climbing the corporate ladder, to making more money, to saving more money, to retiring early. I wasn't a very present or involved father. And when I faced the real threat of losing my oldest son, man, I'll never forget that. I felt like I had been an absolute failure across the board. And I remember sitting in the hospital with him, over those coming days or over those weeks that he was recovering from his heart surgery, feeling so much gratitude that he had been given a second chance. The doctors, the surgeons got in and they closed up the holes in his heart. They patched him up using the skin around his heart. It was phenomenal. It was fascinating. I was so grateful for those skilled professionals that had dedicated their life to save my son's life. I was grateful. I was grateful that he had a second chance at life. But more than anything, I was grateful that I was given a second chance to be his father. I had a new sense of urgency that I found in that hospital over those 2 weeks. No longer would I trade what mattered most for money, for one day, for the hope of, I hope it all works out and I can retire in my 50s and try to buy my life back. That pain woke me up. That urgency, it made me hungry. And shortly after asking those questions, shortly after, reevaluating the priorities in my life, I found a book. And this is the first book that opened me up to the idea of having an impossible goal. I want you to consider this. The only thing that I had considered up until that moment was the idea and the possibility of retiring early. Other people had considered it. Other people had done it. That was as best as I could imagine for my life at that point. But in that hospital over those couple of weeks, I read a couple of books. I read a lot of books as I was kind of evaluating everything I had done with my life and my financial plan. And one of the books that I read was Creating Wealth. Now, it wasn't the title of the book that caught my attention. It was the subtitle of the book. The subtitle of that book said you could use these 7 principles to retire in 10 years or less. Now, that subtitle stopped me in my tracks. That subtitle allowed me to consider something I had never actually considered before. It was always possible for someone, including myself, to retire in 10 years or less. I had just never considered it. I want you to consider this. What are the things in your life that you've never even contemplated, that you've never even considered, that are absolutely possible for you, that you just haven't given yourself the permission or the opportunity to even consider? Because prior to that consideration, the only thing I saw were the multitude of pathways, how to optimize my brokerage account, how to, do option trading, how to work harder, save more money, and how to just hope that the stock market worked worked out that I could have enough to retire early. But once I considered a new possibility, retiring in 10 years or less, every option to just retiring early started to fade to the background because there were really only a few possibilities to even make that audacious claim a reality for me. This is what opened me up to the idea of getting into the world of real estate. Prior to that, I had thought real estate was risky. I had never even considered that as a pathway for me. But as soon as I saw that there was a pathway to retire in 10 years, not 30, everything changed. I saw the world differently. I'll never forget where I was, how I felt when I saw a new vision for my life that had always been there. I had just never previously considered. That's the key, my friends. If a thought has never occurred to you, you'll never filter your decisions through that possibility. Your prefrontal cortex is the part of your brain that you need to start accessing more often to set impossible goals, because impossible goals open you up to brand new realities and brand new pathways that are always there for all people. It's just that most people never consider them. So here are a couple of core principles that I want you to consider for the opportunity, for the possibility of retiring in 10 years or less. Core principle number one: impossible is relative. A goal feels impossible only because of who you are right now. It's not the goal that has to change, it's you. One of my favorite parts of setting an impossible goal is the opportunity to constantly work on the one asset that I have complete control over. That's me. Working on my mindsets, working on my skill sets, working on my connections and my network. Impossible is relative until I change the person that I'm looking at in the mirror every single day. Number two, raise the stakes to raise the urgency. When nothing's on the line, we drift. It's just human tendency. It's the primitive part of our brain that wants to be as lazy and as easy and as safe and as comfortable as possible. So when nothing's on the line, when there's no urgency, we're just going to drift. We're going to stay status quo and mediocre. When we put a level of urgency on to the decisions that we make, we start to rise up. When everything's on the line, we can move mountains. Quite literally, we can. The difference between the beam on the ground and the beam between burning buildings was just urgency. That was it. And urgency transforms us. Number three, identity always precedes results. You don't wait until you hit the goal to become the person. You become the person first, and then your goal becomes inevitable. Here's what I want you to ask yourself. What version of me is going to make this goal a done deal? What version of me is required to make this goal my inevitable reality? Once you can start seeing and getting to know the future version of you in your mind's eye, you'll start to realize that you, my friends, are capable of so much more than you currently give yourself credit for. Tap into that future version of you and ask him or her questions. What is he or she, what have they learned that you need to learn today? What would that future version of you come back and tell the present version of you if you could have that opportunity? I mean, think back to the 20-year-old version of you, the first time you got rejected, the first date that you went on that didn't go the way you wanted, or the first time you got rejected from a college that you applied for, anything like that. What would the present version of you go back and tell that person? You'd probably tell that person that it's okay, you're going to get through this, it's not that bad, you didn't really want to date that person anyway, that college wasn't really meant for you, look what you're doing now. I mean, the perspective that we have with time, with growth, is awesome. So tap into that future version of you, get to know him or her, and allow that future version of you to talk to the present version of you. Okay, now, last one. There are so many ways to win in the game of money and life, but there's really only one way to fail. Most people want to obsess over how. When they set a goal, they want to immediately tap into that part of their brain that wants to map out all the details, connect all the dots. But when you commit to becoming the person who won't quit, the how finds you. All you have to do is raise the level of urgency and make a commitment. Go from being interested in something to being committed. The second you make a commitment, all of the anxiety, all of the what ifs, they all fade to the background. And now it's just a matter of time. What are the things that you have to try? What are the failures that you have to get through to make your inevitable reality your absolute reality? The only way to fail in life is to stay the same. So, my friends, if you're ready to stop playing small, if you're ready to become the person who whom financial freedom in 10 years or less is not just possible for, but inevitable for, then it's time to take the next step. It's time to take everything I've talked about today and to put it into action. Find out what your impossible goal is, define it, get to know the future version of you, and raise the level of urgency. I love setting impossible goals in my life because they get me to think differently. They get me to think bigger. They get me to eliminate all of the distractions, all of the incremental improvements in my life and chase something big. My friends, we get one shot at this thing. One shot at this thing called life. My invitation for you is live all out. Leave it all on the playing field and live big. All right, my friends, thanks so much for hanging out today. I really appreciate you tuning in. But before you go, if we talked about something today that made you want to take action, you need to get yourself registered for the How to Retire in 10 Years Summit. It's the financial game changer that you've been looking for, teaching you exactly how to create passive income and financial freedom in 2025. Jump on it early because we've got a special bonus waiting for you. All the details are in the link below, or head on over to retireintenyears.com. So get registered and I'll see you at the summit.